everyone for coming to another virtual event. I know it's not what everyone necessarily wants at the end of the day is to be on Zoom again. So I really, I can guarantee that this will be a really fun use of your time. So I think you'll really enjoy it. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Lisa Ryers. I'm one of the co-presidents of the Brown Club of Greater San Francisco. And I just want to give a shout out to some of the leadership at the other Brown Clubs that advertised this event for us, Andrew at Brown Club of Georgia, and also Emily at the Brown Club of Washington, D.C., as well as because our guest today, Jon Birger, has brought along some of his guests from his book, who are Yale grads and Columbia grads. So I also, I want to give a shout out to Raul at the Yale Club here in San Francisco and Erin at the Columbia Club in San Francisco, who we, asked them to publicize the event, and they didn't hesitate and said we'd be happy to share it with our alumni. So hoping that in the future, this is the kind of thing that maybe with a bunch of schools we can share in real life. So, and I just want to actually just welcome everyone that is here tonight, but special shout outs to those alums. And with that, I would also encourage you, if you'd like to just rename yourself in the participant list with your alma mater and your year of graduation, because you never know who might be here. It might be a long lost friend. And so we can take a look who's here. So with that, you probably know the housekeeping about trying to stay muted throughout the program till the end and drop your questions into the chat. And we will get to your questions at the end of our event. And I think that's what I've got. So I'm very pleased to welcome Jon Birger to our event tonight, who's sharing his latest book with us, Make Your Move, The New Science of Dating and Why Women Are in Charge. But Jon is also the author of Date-o-nomics, How Dating Became a Lopsided Numbers Game. He's a former senior writer at both Fortune and Money. His work has also appeared in Barron's, Bloomberg Business Week, New York Magazine, the New York Post, Time, and the Washington Post. A graduate of Brown University, class of 1990, just like me, yes. Jon lives with his family in Larchmont, New York. So yeah, Brown 90. So Jon, I think the obvious opening question for people here is that you're obviously a guy who usually writes about things like oil and gas and lives with his family in New York. So what prompted you to actually write a book like this?
So yeah, so with my first book, Date-o-nomics, this was like always the first question I got. It was basically, how did a guy who wrote about really boring stuff like the bond market or oil and gas or mutual funds, how did I ever end up writing a book about dating? And the backstory has a lot to do with kind of the my workplace at Fortune magazine. I mean, the editorial staff was disproportionately women, and I couldn't help but notice that all the guys were either married like myself or involved in kind of long-term relationships. Whereas the women, who I think I can honestly say had a lot more going for them dating-wise than we guys did, they were all single, and the ones I was friends with, they had these kind of dating histories and dating horror stories that made no sense to me. And over time, I couldn't figure out why, at least within my friend group and my work friend group, I couldn't figure out why dating had become so much harder for women than it was for men. And that kind of led to my first book, Date-o-nomics. And Date-o-nomics wasn't really an advice book. It was kind of more pop science. It explored how lopsided sex ratios among the college educated have kind of spilled over into post-college dating. So for the past 20, 30 years, we've had 1/3 more women than men graduate from college in the US and attend college in the US. those of us who attended Ivy League schools tend to be somewhat oblivious to this, because there's actually a little known loophole in Title IX, which excludes private college admissions from the ban on sex discrimination that exists in Title IX. And actually, this loophole was demanded by the presidents of the Ivy League. So what you'll frequently find is schools like Brown and Columbia have materially higher acceptance rates for boys than they do for girls, or for men than they do for women. Whereas the top public universities like University of Michigan or University of Virginia, they have higher acceptance rates for women than for men, because the women tend to be better applicants. And this is kind of borne out by like I think something like 2/3 of valedictorians last year, high school valedictorians, were girls. So Date-o-nomics kind of explored like both the origin of this college gender gap and how it plays out in
of Grip Venture Studio. And I have
can we just get everybody muted, please? Thank you.
Sorry. I don't think that was, I thought that was a question. So Date-o-nomics really kind of tried to answer how we got the college gender gap and how it's spilling over into post-college dating. And the answer to the second question basically was that the emergence of the hookup culture and the reduction in marriage rates among college grads was largely tied to these lopsided sex ratios. That basically, when women are in oversupply, the dating culture becomes less monogamous. But when I was writing Date-o-nomics 5, 6, 7 years ago, I wasn't so focused on solving the dating problem. I was just like, for me, it was kind of an intellectual exercise to figure out how we got where we are. Amy Andersen might recall this from when she and I met probably 6 or 7 years ago, that I had little or no interest in solving the dating problem. I was just trying to explain it. As Amy probably could have warned me back then, but when I got out on book tour with Date-o-nomics, I kind of had it in my head that the whole knowledge is power thing would be enough. That if I just explained to the women who showed up at my book talks that, this is why the guys behave so badly, and this is why you can't seem to find a decent guy. I thought that would be enough. But what actually happened is that the women who showed up at my book talks were like, well, I get it. I'm glad to hear it's not my fault. Now just tell me what to do. And I didn't really have a good answer 5, 6 years ago to that question. And in fact, I had this background as a writer for Fortune magazine. I thought of myself as a super serious business journalist, and honestly, I had a very snooty view towards the whole self-help genre. And really, the last thing I wanted to do was become the love doctor. So, there's really very little advice in Date-o-nomics, and the advice that does exist was basically dragged out of me screaming and kicking by my editor, who told me that you couldn't you couldn't do a deep dive into these problems and not offer hope and solutions. But honestly, that's exactly what I did with Date-o-nomics, and I'm trying to right those wrongs with Make Your Move. So this is a very long-winded answer to Lisa's question. That Make Your Move is an attempt to kind of do what I should have done in Date-o-nomics in terms of finding solutions to this problem we have, in which for college educated women, the dating market is incredibly unfair because there aren't enough college educated men.
Yeah, well, I think you you definitely followed up on your intent with that, because you hammered in on some specific strategies and some specific patterns that you found from just data and science to kind of lead, you know, single women down a path that might be more successful for them. So I know you've brought along some guests from your book, so maybe you can introduce them and talk about some of the specific strategies that you did, you know, happen upon.
Well, I'll give you like the Cliff Notes version of the strategies, and then I'll introduce my three guests who are at least on my screen directly to my right. So the some of the core ideas of Make Your Move is arguing that in this kind of an environment in which college grad men are essentially in undersupply, and also in kind of a post-Me Too world, women who are willing to be assertive and make the first move have an advantage. The other big theme of the book is kind of arguing that that there's a reason you never hear people say, oh, I love online dating. All the guys I meet are so nice and so wonderful. They all treat me so well. And it's really easy to find true love. Like I have yet to ever hear that said either by a friend or on Twitter, other than as like a comedy routine, essentially. And the other big theme of my book is arguing or encouraging people to get off the dating apps and going back to dating people whom they know in real life instead. And one of my favorite places to meet, you know, one of the things I encourage people to do is to use the workplace as a way of meeting people, because who do you know better than the people you work with? And the two people, at least on my screen to my right, Mike Stanton and Beth Stanton, can you guys wave at least? I don't know. They are featured in my book, albeit through pseudonyms, but they have agreed to de-anonymize themselves for this. They met at work, and they have I think a really sweet love story or kind of a love story that they can tell about how they met. And then my friend Amy Andersen, who's all the way to the right, is probably the Bay Area's top matchmaker. And I suspect Amy has, I don't know for sure, but I suspect Amy has similarly negative views on online dating as I do. So, you know, she can chime in on that as well.
Definitely. Well, I can kind of start. I'm Amy. I'm the founder and CEO of a matchmaking company that I started about 18 years ago, which is crazy. For me, in starting my business, it was really based on observation when I was living in Silicon Valley. And that's where I witnessed a really unusual disparity in the ratio of guys to women. I was networking with a lot of professional, very well-educated guys in Palo Alto, kind of right outside of Stanford University. And I noticed a very strange kind of aspect with the social landscape in Palo Alto, where there was a dearth of eligible women. And that's when I realized that I had been doing a ton of volunteer work and networking with a lot of women in San Francisco who were lamenting to me about how difficult the dating scene was in San Francisco, and basically where are the guys? And the guys in Palo Alto were saying, where are the women? So that was kind of the genesis of my concept for Links. Back then, I didn't know if there was going to be an online play or something more traditional. And I started pinging my friends, and my friends were like, Amy, shut up and stop talking about this and start this, and we will become clients. Because they realized, and I realized, how difficult the Bay Area dating market was, very lopsided and challenging. And I think that's very true of most metropolitan regions, whether it's Boston or New York or Los Angeles. I think each geography has its own challenges. Certainly with the rise of online dating and all the different choices vis-a-vis the dating apps, it's created a very, I think, confusing time for singles. There's just such, there's been such a, I think, crossover in terms of the mentality that people are taking, where it's this high volume approach. And that is the antithesis of what I do at Lynx, where it really is about slowing down and focusing on exactly what you're looking for and almost blocking out all that noise around you that might have kind of challenged the mental space of what somebody's looking for. So I find, especially now outside of kind of the heights of COVID, that the dating market now is very challenging. People are really wanting to meet, but it's a matter of really figuring out what they're looking for in a match and kind of channeling that energy where they slow down. And that's what I help my clients do. And that can be very challenging when people have been so accustomed to high volume dating and constantly looking for that next, what I would call BBD, the bigger, better deal, which is very frustrating for so many people.
Can I give a little I'd like to introduce Mike and Beth as well, but can I give a little like pre-introduction for them, Lisa? Is that okay? So I think I've known Mike and Beth as long as they've known each other. Yes, I think, yeah. Honestly, they could have appeared in any number of chapters in my book, and they actually check off like 3 of the big themes in my book. So I have a chapter all about dating younger men, and I believe, Mike, you're 4 or 5 years younger than Beth. Am I? Yeah.
5 years and 1 month.
5 years and 1 month. I'm a big believer in workplace dating and office romances because, I like a big theme of my book is date who you know, and who do you know better than somebody you worked with for 2 years. And then I'm a big fan of women making the first move, and maybe Beth could share. I mean, Beth has a fantastic story about her first move with Mike. So that's my introduction, and you guys can just maybe take it from there.
Sure. Yeah. I just want to say that 1 month, that when I get to be 6 years older is a really probably that's the rough time in our marriage every year. But no, it's true. I do. I didn't really realize it at the time when we met. I was 28 and Mike was 22 or 20. Well, 22. I was 27, 28, and I had been single for a while, and I wasn't a person who ever. I stayed home, and I don't know. I was never a person who went to bars. I didn't really understand how I was gonna meet someone, and he and I were friends at work. We started almost at the same time, and we were friends from the beginning. But because he was 5 years older, I just thought I'm not a person who dates younger men, and so it just really never occurred to me that this was something that could ever turn into a relationship. But we worked together in the New York office of a financial newspaper, a trade paper where Jon also worked. And it wasn't, I think he had sort of tried to ask me out, and I sort of brushed him off, right? I wasn't sure he was being serious. And then he decided to take a job in DC, and he left, and all of a sudden I really missed him. And, this was sort of this was what, 25, this is almost 25 years ago now. Obviously it was technologies were completely different. We had just gotten email, and we were, I think, kind of flirting on email, but ultimately I decided that what I needed to do was just to write him a love letter, and not knowing, I was terrified because I didn't know anything about his, I knew that he was the kind of, I had decided this was the kind of person that I wanted, I had decided I wanted to date him. In fact, I had decided even before I sent the letter that I wanted to marry him, actually, but I wasn't gonna say that in the letter. But you know, so, you know, because we had worked together for a time, I just, you know, I'd gotten to know him as a friend, and I knew that you know, I was interested, but what I didn't know, he had been in DC for a while. I didn't know if he was dating anyone. I didn't, you know how to find out. But I wrote him a letter and just said, you know, I think maybe you're too young for me, but I'm crazy about you. And, you know, I would love to spend some more time with you. And I sent the letter. I called him up and asked for his mailing address, and I think caught him just completely by surprise. And I was so nervous that I took it down wrong. And so when I sent the letter, he didn't get it. And then eventually it came back to me, and then I had to like overnight it so that he would get it by Thanksgiving, when I knew that our families lived nearby each other. So I needed him to get the letter by Thanksgiving so we could have a date, which we did. And that was, like I said, like 25 years ago, probably. And the best thing I ever did.
And if you buy Make Your Move, you can read like the extra details.
Well, I mean, we really appreciate, you know, you sharing just your personal lives and your histories with us. I think what I'm gathering from Jon's book is, even though something like this happened, you know, a couple years back, that it's still something that's of significant importance even in 2021 and beyond. And I know, Jon, you did in your book, you investigated a little bit more about how something like this might even be possible in a work climate like a Google climate, or something that we're familiar with today. Or can you talk a little bit about that? And maybe Amy can chime in too about.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get the fact that workplace dating is complicated, and I'm not going to like argue otherwise. But there have been a couple different studies on workplace dating. One of them showed that 25% of couples who meet at work eventually marry. The other one showed that 30% of couples who meet at work eventually marry. And I think it's pretty obvious, but if it's not, those are incredibly high percentages. You know, trust me, 30% of people who meet on a dating app do not marry. So the question is, why is it that these couples who meet in the workplace have such a high success rate when it comes to becoming life partners? And my argument in Make Your Move is this is because, kind of like Mike and Beth, they already knew each other really, really well before the first date. I mean, I knew them really, really well. And there was like a 10% chance it wouldn't work out. Like, I mean, like anybody who knew them knew that once they started dating, it would work out, because we knew them and we knew they were compatible. They knew each other. And the challenge nowadays with online dating is that every first date is a blind date with a complete stranger. And for Lisa and me and Mike and Beth and Amy, I mean, to me, like to us, I have a feeling some of the folks on this event are younger, but for us, that's a really foreign idea. The idea that you're going to go out on a blind date with a complete stranger. I mean, no, it happened, but it was uncommon. Nowadays, every first date online is a blind date with a complete stranger. And the problem is you're starting from zero. You have no idea who's going to walk through the door of the sushi bar. You have no idea if you're compatible. Honestly, you have no idea if the person who walks through the door is who he or she says he is. I mean, I think there was a Pew Research survey that showed that something like, you know, a majority of women on dating apps believe that it's common for men to lie on dating apps. And I'm sure that people on this event have had experiences of people lying about their age, their background, their maybe even their marital status on a dating app. If you're dating somebody you know from work or know from church or a friend of a friend, like the odds of the lying happening are much, much lower. So that's why I'm a big fan of dating people you actually know, kind of like Mike and Beth, versus dating complete strangers, which I really think is kind of a shot in the dark.
And I think to expand on that, for those individuals that are interested in meeting people still through the very easy resource of dating apps, I would suggest to do a FaceTime prior and have a quick screen over the phone to save time, to really almost do your vetting to see, okay, is he or she who they have presented themselves vis-a-vis whatever profile to be, right? Ask some questions, get to know them, and then determine if it warrants enough chemistry to then meet in person. Right. But I've heard so many, you can imagine, disastrous stories where people meet and they were completely not who they said they were, and they had lied and fabricated. To Jon's point, they were married. And so that's not fair to anybody. And that's a huge waste of time. So I think a good rule of thumb is just doing a quick screening through a simple phone call or FaceTime to just try to get to know that person, limit it to 10 minutes. If you're hitting it off, then suggest bridging the gap and meeting in person.
Amy, can I ask you a question on that regards? I mean, how many of your clients do you think commonly go out on first dates with people whom they've never even talked to over the phone?
A ton, many.
I mean, to me, and I feel like an old fogey here, but to me, I find this shocking, but I know it's true. But there's just so much you can garner from the intonation in somebody's voice, whether if it's a video, if it's FaceTime, like the facial expressions, body language. And honestly, I'm just shocked at how many people are willing to go out on a first date with somebody whom they've never interacted with, even by voice.
Definitely. And also eye contact. Seeing if you're doing the FaceTime, like seeing if they're looking into your eyes, if they're shifting away, maybe they're lying, if they're covering up their face, just that could be reason enough to not proceed and therefore close the loop and move on to the next individual, for sure. But I also tell people, when you are doing that kind of vetting screening call, and of course, this individual who you're having this preliminary date with doesn't have to know its kind of its purpose and intent is to screen, but have maybe 3 to 5 vetting questions ahead of time that are kind of set out. So basically, you can be asking that individual questions that are important to you from a values perspective. And as you're asking those questions, and delicately, so it's not like an interview or an interrogation, delicately weaving them into the first phone call conversation, see how they react. What do they say? To Jon's point, watch that body language, eye contact, all of those important things. And chances are you're going to derive a lot of very important answers from that phone call. But again, the idea and the thinking behind that is to save time. So you're not out on that date in person realizing, oh, I'm 2 hours into this, and now I'm even more depressed and frustrated from the dating scene. So you got to be strategic and smart about how you date.
Really, really great tips. I also just, I know we kind of jumped around, but I also just wanted to give Mike a chance to talk a little bit about, when Beth made this overture. I think a lot of women are also just, they're afraid to make a move because they're worried about that reaction. So Mike, maybe you can speak a little bit to your experience and what advice you would give on your end.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the obvious response is that it's going to be flattering, right? I mean, and especially in the situation where we have, the imbalance worked on both sides. Beth was, far more accomplished and far more experienced professionally than I was, and the fact that she was, interested in dating and spending more time was again just a huge piece of flattery. Just to reinforce one thing that Jon said is it's not just the point that we work together, but it's that we got to know each other. And, as Beth mentioned, our families live very close to each other. Despite, some of the differences, we grew up in fairly similar backgrounds, and all of those things were just tells that were going to make it much easier to build a relationship, that, we spoke a common language, and we knew we spoke a common language before our first date. So the fact that we were able to discover that through work was more important than the fact that, the specific venue where we met each other, is the fact that we knew that ahead of time. And then the only other thing I'll mention, and we may get into this a little more deeper, about just the dynamics of dating someone at work. We did benefit from the fact that we were not in the same office when we started dating. I'm not sure it would have been as easy if we were in the same place. We were peers. There was no power dynamic when we started dating, and ultimately, frankly, Beth, we made career choices. Beth left the company we were working for, in part because I was going to stay there. And it didn't, as those relationships work-wise changed, it was not going to be as simple. So there were some sacrifices and choices made there, but ultimately it was, hey, we're very happy.
So Lisa, you had referenced, workplace dating policies from Google and other companies, and I failed to address that. So let me just chime in there. I get the fact that workplace dating is complicated. Maybe women perceive that more than men, but particularly in kind of a post-Me Too world in which women don't want to be pestered at work or harassed at work, obviously. But there are a couple of the big Silicon Valley companies, Facebook and Google, have come up with workplace dating policies that I actually think make a ton of sense. And that is, both Facebook and Google have a policy that you can ask anybody out on a date once, but only once. And any answer that's not a yes is a no. So if I ask Mike out on a date and he says, yeah, no, I'm busy on Wednesday, that's a no. And if I ask again, basically I'm fired. So I think these kinds of policies make a ton of sense and are a way of embracing the potential of workplace dating and office romances without allowing the harassment and pestering that can sometimes go with it.
Definitely. I think there's also very clear boundaries with that, which provides, I think, a lot of comfort and safety for both sexes, for sure. I know with my clients, a lot of them still, especially the men, tell me they're really scared to even almost make eye contact with women at work because of the fallout from the Me Too movement, and just being very cautious about that and wanting very clear boundaries of their professional life and their personal life. Therefore, the men and the women I talk to on a daily basis, a lot of them tell me, and this is kind of outside of COVID, that they are not interested in even thinking about office romance. Maybe that's going to change a bit, but for a lot of people I talk to, they're just extraordinarily cautious about that, not even wanting to kind of dip their toe in that, those waters, that possibility.
Well, so I mean, my argument is that this is why women who are assertive, like Beth, have this huge built-in advantage, and kind of one of my themes in the book is that it's the men like women who like them. And whenever I use this line in the lecture circuit, women look at me like I'm out of my fucking mind, because all of the mainstream dating books, from The Rules to Ignore the Guy, Get the Guy, basically advocate this very complicated version of playing hard to get. And the message that these books want young women to send to men basically boils down to not interested means keep trying. And look, it's possible that in the 1950s, not interested means keep trying. Maybe that actually led to lots of marriages. But I think we could probably all agree that that's not going to fly in 2021 or 2022, that most women, want men to believe that not interested means not interested. So a guy who perceives that a woman isn't responding to him is going to move on. He's not going to assume that she's playing hard to get, that she wants him to continue to pursue, because that's not a good way to live these days, or any days probably. This is one of the reasons why I think women who are willing to take a chance and make the first move have this huge built-in advantage over other women who kind of sit back and wait for men to court them or pursue them.
Exactly. And I think the universal message is confidence is sexy. Women love a confident guy, men love a confident woman. And Beth, your story about how you wrote that letter, I love that, because that is confidence right there. It's old fashioned, but it's also confident. And you were living in the moment and taking that risk and chance. And I'm a big believer in that. If you don't do that, then you're never going to know. And as much as us women want to think that Prince Charming is going to come galloping up and arrive, in this gorgeous horse, on our doorstep, he's probably not. So to Jon's point, it is important to make that move and be confident in your actions and own that, right? You can't then kind of backpedal. You got to own that. But then I'm a believer that at a certain point, you need the man to be a man, and men want to feel worthy and masculine, and that balance is there between the energies of being a woman and feminine, but also allowing him to do what he wants to do and play up that role, so to speak.
You just made me think to add, I did not ask him to marry me. He asked me. And I wasn't going to ask him.
There you go. You gave him permission, right?
What's that?
You gave him permission.
Absolutely.
You let him know that you were interested. Mm-hmm. And then if he wasn't interested, he was not going to progress with that. But you gave him that opportunity, and that window, that door was open. And he stepped into that, which is wonderful.
And can I just, as you can tell, I love Mike and Beth's stories, so I'm going to dig in a little bit more. One of the many reasons I don't like online dating is the people who meet on apps, by sorting through 20 different dating profiles and settling on one or two or one person. They don't have the stories like the one Beth just told. And I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just for effect. Beth, Mike, how often do you guys tell and retell among friends the story about the letter?
I've told it a lot. And
a lot, right? And the reason I'm bringing this up is there's actually a ton of relationship science and relationship research that's been done that shows that these stories, these kind of meet cute stories of how we meet, are really important, and they kind of can act as mortar in a relationship, and they explain who we are as couples, and it's why we tell and retell these kinds of stories so often. So a couple who meets in Seattle on a ferry, or like Mike and Beth did at work with the funny story about Beth's love letter getting returned to sender. These stories aren't just funny stories, they're really important. And if you meet on a dating app after sorting through 20 dating profiles and then proceeding with 2 weeks of cautious texting, you're not going to feel as invested in the relationship. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible to meet the love of your life online. I'm just saying it's harder. And the data on this proves it. I mean, the breakup rates for couples who meet through friends and family, the 1 year breakup rate for couples who meet through friends and family is 9%. For couples who meet as coworkers, it's 6%. Meet as neighbors, it's 7%. But for couples who meet online, it's 16%. So you can tell, like, these couples who have these fun ways that they met, who actually knew each other before they met, the success rate for these relationships is higher. And I don't think it's a coincidence.
Well, that's what I really love about your book. And it actually reminds me, we did another event last year with Brown economics professor Emily Oster, who wrote a book called Crib Sheet. And it was for women who were pregnant and had to make decisions about their pregnancy. And it was all data-based. So it wasn't like, you know, Aunt Lynn telling you you can have an extra beer. It was, oh, the data actually says you can have a beer, and you know, the statistics show that things will probably work out your way. So what I like about, you know, the work you've done with this book is that even for somebody who perhaps was not born when we were, but, you know, basically aligns themselves with what data shows, can really get something out of this, because the data is showing what those of us who were around before the internet actually recognize. So I kind of, with that in mind, I know we've had some questions in the chat as well. For some of these, you know, younger people who, you know, the internet and the apps are kind of all that they really know, what did your research, or, you know, what did your findings find that is a way to maybe hybridize what they have in their worlds?
So my favorite app for dating is not actually a dating app. It's Meetup. And so this idea, like, I'm sure everybody, or I suspect everybody here is familiar with Meetup, but if not, it's kind of a way of meeting like-minded people in your community. Like if you want to clean up parks, or go mountain climbing, or join a running club, this is a way of meeting like-minded people in the real world. And it's not a dating app. So when you meet people, there's less pressure to connect. And also you kind of get to, you know, I'm all in favor of meeting people in the wild, so to speak, as opposed to through this kind of prefabricated method of dating apps. And if you meet people in the wild, you have a better sense of who they are as people, and how they treat other people, and how they behave, basically. So if you want a dating app, my recommendation is a non-dating app, which is Meetup.
Or I would also say volunteer work, right? Getting into your community, volunteering through whatever, you know, charity or cause that you feel passionate about. It's a wonderful way to connect, to Jon's point, with like-minded individuals, and have that immediate connection about something that you really care about, that can then serve as an icebreaker, maybe to parlay that into a conversation about dating, and see if that chemistry and connection is there.
Yeah, that's those are some great action items after an event like this, for people, that they could do that right away after, you know, after an event like this. Kind of on the other end of the spectrum, we also kind of have a question in chat. What about the population that's in the 50+ group that has to kind of be in that same pool with everyone that is dating on these apps? And so is the strategy any different in terms of the data and your personal things that you found, Amy and Jon?
I'm gonna let, for me, I don't think it'd be much different, but I suspect Amy would have a better insight into this.
I think it's challenging. I mean, I think that re-entering the dating market after having been married for, say, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the landscape is completely different because of the dating apps and online dating. And frankly, for a lot of my clients, it's really overwhelming, and having to kind of navigate that on their own is very challenging, and it's overwhelming. So I think certainly, gosh, there's a lot of advice I could give around kind of dating in their 50s, or dating after divorce, or loss of a spouse, or whatever somebody's circumstances. But I think certainly having some good sound bites around kind of what brings them here to the dating market now, kind of a little bit of their backstory without divulging too much information in the early stages. So especially, for instance, if it's a 50-year-old who's now dating post-divorce, having a good clip of information that they can share on that first date to reveal a little bit about themselves. So peel that kind of first onion layer back, but leave it at that till that trust and connection is there and they feel comfortable around whoever they're having that first date with, and then slowly kind of reveal more about themselves over the course of date 2, date 3, and so forth. But I would certainly say, I think no matter what, irrespective of age, enlist the help of your friends. Your social network is so important when it comes to dating, not only in regards to tapping that social network as a resource, enlisting your friends to play matchmaker and saying, telling them, I am really ready to find somebody. This is going to be my year, like more than anything. And especially for the good friends, just say, you know me really well. What type of person do you think that I should be matched to? And once you have a clear idea of those 3 to 5 kind of bullet points of metrics, if you will, kind of pertaining to the ideal match, then enlist their help to try to find a match from that social network. Same thing for somebody who's in their 50s or, again, whatever age. Ask your friends about advice they have, places to meet people. Again, kind of getting outside of, having to think that the apps or Match.com is the only choice, because there's so many fabulous other resources out there. You just have to be strategic about how you go about your dating, and smart, and not be shy or nervous to enlist the help of friends in your community. And through that, you will see results. That's for sure.
Can I just build upon what Amy just said? So there's a story I tell in Make Your Move, and coincidentally, it's told by a woman who's a Brown alum, although in the book she has a pseudonym. And she's a divorcee. She's late 40s, early 50s. I'm not sure exactly what her age was at the time this happened, but let's say she was probably late 40s. And she had done what Amy had suggested, which was kind of tell people, reach out to friends, do you know anybody you can set me up with? But this woman, how can I put it? I mean, she happens to be the most attractive person of either gender I'm good friends with. And what inevitably would happen with her is that, and actually this happened with me and her, is that she asked me, and I actually did have somebody in mind for her, but this guy looks-wise was so far beneath her level that I was worried she would be mad at me if I set her up with this guy. So I didn't do it. And we were talking about this after the fact, and she said she definitely would have gone out with this guy. But she's now engaged, and the way and this is where I'm headed with this. And her strategy, her workaround with this was that she spent like a couple hours on Facebook, and she kind of looked into the Facebook pages of her female friends' husbands, and wanted to see if they had, and she figured if she liked the husbands, there was a decent chance their friends might be good guys too. So she was hunting around for single friends of the husbands of her friends that she liked. And then she would circle back to her friends and say, what do you think of Timothy, your husband's friend? He's single. Do you think he would like me? And because she had already done the work, and it was much easier for her friends to kind of agree to the setup, because there was no risk that this woman was going to be upset if she got, if they set her up with somebody who maybe they perceived that, that wasn't quite at her level, and she got engaged to one of these guys. So I think if you put the time in, don't just ask your friends casually, oh, is there somebody you could set me up with? Actually dig a little deeper, because I think we've all had this experience of, and I bet Amy has had this experience as a matchmaker, being unsure whether you think two people might be compatible, but you don't want to offend somebody by setting them up with somebody who could, you don't want to endanger your relationship with your friend by setting them up with somebody whom they might not like. So as a result, you don't end up taking any risks.
Well, exactly. And I think that's why a lot of friends avoid setting friends up, because they don't want to feel bad about that, especially if the match doesn't work out. So I hear that from a lot of people, and, clients will say, oh my gosh, my friends never set me up. So I think a good idea would be to, especially if you're open and amenable to tapping that social network and maybe doing the work for your friends, saying, oh, Timothy looks interesting. What about John? What about Sam, etc. Then is to say, kind of frame it, I am so open to finding love and amenable. And even if it doesn't work out, it's an opportunity and a learning opportunity for myself. And for that, I'm grateful. So that way, then the friends aren't feeling bad, especially if it doesn't work out.
That's really good advice. And we always love hearing success stories too.
I have one other thought on the dating over 50 thing. I tend to believe that couples who are on their second or third marriage are kind of, maybe they've already had their kids, they're already at a certain place in life, and maybe all the must-haves that were important when they were 25 might not be as important when you're 55. And where I'm going with this is that I've seen a number of successful, what I call mixed collar marriages among older couples, like kind of blue collar guys dating white collar women. And these relationships work out really well because all these kind of hangups that everybody had when they were younger have kind of fallen by the wayside. And in general, I'm a big fan of what I call unchecking the college box when it comes to dating, and being more focused on whether the other person is a good person and not whether he went to Brown or she went to Brown.
Exactly. No, that's just, hearing that is music to my ears. My favorite clients actually are those typically 50 plus, generally because they know themselves. They've put in the work, they've done therapy, they're evolved individuals, and they're also very clear in terms of what they're looking for. And they know what they want, they know what they don't want. And they come into my office with that really nice, clear vision, and also a just no BS, no games, no drama mentality, which is really nice. Versus sometimes, and I hate to kind of, stereotype here, but some of my younger clients in their 20s or 30s, I call them moving targets. Not only is their list of requirements, 20 pages long of their must-haves, but also when I find them that, what I would call unicorn, then they change their mind. They want this, they want that. So it's kind of, I'm chasing after them, and it's exhausting for me as a matchmaker. So the 50 plus generally really knows themselves. They have a clear vision.
Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate that about the 50 plus experience, and also, dealing with the different, blue collar, white collar, and that, it's ironic that we are kind of doing a university event, but I really think it's an opportunity just to think about it as an envelope for the information that's being shared, and the emotions that are being shared. So before we wrap up, I really would like to give some people on the call an opportunity to ask a question if they do have one. So If anyone on the call would like to unmute themselves at this time to ask a question, feel free. See how that goes.
I wanted to ask a question about Bumble. Obviously, Bumble gives the woman, the first move. Although I am sometimes distressed by how often I get messages that say, "Hi," which is like, that's cheating, you're supposed to actually write a message. Anyway, I'm somebody who has very clear goals in a relationship, monogamous, passionate, the whole terrible, unrealistic combination, poetry and Shakespeare, curses. Anyway, the reason why I ask this is that I have the feeling that in general with dating apps, one of our biggest problems is time and distraction and volume and sort of follow through. And I think that problem tends to be worse for, divorced single moms who have a job in their 50s than it is for, a man whose kids are launched. So I have some disparity there. And I guess what I'm asking you is, what's the difference between putting the sort of the initiative in the hands of the woman on a dating app versus the sort of initiative that you're talking about? I mean, if you can't take initiative on a dating app, how are you going to take it in real life?
So, I have a lot of respect for Whitney Wolf, who's the founder of Bumble, and I'm going to preface what I'm about to say. Like, I feel bad about saying this because she has said nice things about my first book, Date-o-nomics, in interviews, but I actually don't think there's a big difference because you don't actually know the person. Whether a woman is sending a message to a complete stranger or a guy is sending a message to a complete stranger, they are still complete strangers, and you are starting from zero with your first date. I mean, I gave a talk to a group at Rollins College in Florida a couple months ago when we were talking about the online dating thing and why all the reasons I don't like online dating. And I posed a question, which I guess I could pose here, but we'll leave it to Lisa about whether I'm going to pose this question to our crowd here. But this was a class of about 30, 40 kids. And this one woman asked me, okay, I get it. There are safety concerns with online dating. The relationships fail at a high rate, but how the heck am I supposed to meet anybody if not through the apps? So we were doing a Zoom thing and I put everybody on Brady Bunch mode. And I said, okay, I want to see a show of hands. How many of you have somebody from the real world whom you like and whom you've ever wondered about, somebody single whom you've ever wondered about dating? 30 kids in the class, 30 hands went up. Now I get the fact that with 21-year-olds, the answer to that may be different than with 51-year-olds, but I ask this question a lot, and I find that most singles already have somebody they've identified from the real world whom they're comfortable with, whom they know and like, and whom they've wondered about dating. So my question to Jon is, why would you start from zero with that woman on Bumble if, and this may not be the case for you, but if there's somebody you already know from the real world who's single, whom you've wondered about dating?
I think maybe I'm a bit of a freak, but if there's somebody in the real world that I want to date, I ask him on a date. And the problem gets to be that you might even develop a reputation for going through candidates in the real world. I don't know. I think some of my friends are actually scared that, you know, somebody, I'm a widower, so we tend to be a little more intentional about finding, you know, a permanent relationship. And I think I make fairly quick decisions about whether it's going to work or not work. And that's a little scary. You know, people see you go through some volume of dates. And so for me, and the other thing is that I'm a nomad, I travel. So, but I'm also very comfortable with strangers. So it's not like, you know, for me, the whole alleged difficulty of meeting somebody that you don't know is not difficult for me. And it's also not difficult for me to screen, you know, candidates, really. I mean, I did investigative work for 30 years. So, you know, when you ask a few questions, you get a sense of whether somebody is or is not telling you the truth and whether they are or not, you know.
Yeah, but I would say the stakes with that screening process are higher for women than they are for men.
You know, honestly, I'm not sure, because are we talking about, what kind of stakes are we talking about? Are we talking about emotional stakes?
No, so the Pew Research did a survey recently. 1/5 of women on dating apps have been threatened with physical violence. You know, a majority of young women on dating apps consider online dating to be unsafe. So it's not just about whether they're lying about their age. I think there's kind of a safety concern with online dating that I have a guy friend who I was talking to about this, and he was upset because he went out on a first date, and the woman on the first date had basically Googled him to death and knew all these little details about him because she was checking him out. And in his mind, this was weird and creepy. In my mind, because I've heard all these terrible horror stories, to me, it made perfect sense, because I believe there are risks for women when associated with online dating that aren't quite the same as they are with men.
Well, I think it makes perfect sense for everybody, because you don't want to waste time. You know, you want to find somebody rather than taking a lot of dates that are just not going to work. So, you know, if you verify a few basic facts about a person, I think that's normal. I mean, you do it if you were meeting somebody for business, and this is more important than business.
Yeah, I think Amy has something to share on this.
Exactly. So I think to that point, certainly do that phone call ahead of meeting, as I mentioned earlier, to save that important time. So you're not spinning your wheels and wasting time with people who are not going to be a good fit. But then perhaps connecting through social media, if you are on Facebook, just casually saying, I wonder if we have any friends in common, as that kind of verification to see if that person is a weirdo or not, right? Versus, I know I tell my clients, don't Google each other. I actually don't give last names or anything like that, because my clients come to me largely because of the privacy that links stands for. Plus, I think there's way too much information out there on the internet, and people start sleuthing and finding too much information, you know, more info that people know about themselves. You know, it's too much information. So I'm a big kind of less is more philosophy when it comes to dating, through a matchmaker or a friend. But through the apps, I think trying to get that extra verification of, you know, just casually seeing if they are on Facebook. You can verify if you have mutual friends, which is kind of comforting, I think. And then having that preliminary phone call to really see if they're legit or not, or if you want to move on to the next individual, because otherwise you're definitely wasting your time and their time, and you're going to get more frustrated.
I was wondering, can we talk about
That's great.
more
Yeah,
about,
do you have a question, Julia?
yeah, I do. About the,
Okay,
I
great.
love the idea of the initial phone call, but I'm struggling a little bit with, like, how do I do that in a way that doesn't feel to whoever I'm trying to date like I'm interviewing them for a job?
Good question. So I think I would, if I were you, I would frame it like, I thought that maybe we could have a quick FaceTime and phone call prior to meeting. That's kind of something that I find is really useful. We can get to know each other over, a 10-minute call, something like that. And importantly, you're going to derive a lot of answers from that, because if that individual is skirting that idea, doesn't like that, or is putting that off, then right there you have your answer, that he's probably hiding something, right? Or is just a total weirdo. So, and you don't want to waste your time or even go down that rat hole, right? So I would just, again, be confident and just say that that's what you want. And frankly, if a guy can't respect that, then he's not your man. Right? I mean, what's strange about saying, hey, can we have a 5-minute phone call and we can get to know each other and then figure out a day and time and hopefully connect in person?
I mean, conceptually, I agree with everything Amy just said, but to me, if online dating feels like job recruiting, or if it feels like online shopping, that should tell you something about online dating.
Fair enough. I don't use the apps myself anymore, specifically for that. It's just too much like work and too little return, but like almost everybody else does. And it's
I just feel like the ethos, the mindset of online shopping and job recruiting is kind of spilling over into online dating. And as every online shopper knows, that like you buy something, you can easily return it. And I really feel like that mindset is infecting dating, because the breakup rates for online relationships are incredibly high, and everybody that you can just log back on and find 100 more people who want to chat with you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Yeah, that's really, I think you had a really great point about trying to use the apps as a tool more so than a goal, as far as things like a meetup app versus necessarily a match app. So it's not getting off the computer completely, but maybe just taking a break from the usual dating apps. I think we have time for one more question if anyone has a solid question.
Hi, this is Diana. I don't know. I raised my hand. I'm not sure what the protocol is here, but
Yeah,
I just wanted to jump
Diana.
in. That's okay. Jon, Amy, it's great to hear your perspective on, what does work, because, people have tried online dating. It can be very stressful. I just want to share a comment about my experience and some of the things you've been talking about. One, the highs, just saying hi when you engage with someone. I totally agree. I think that's like, give them something to work with, whichever side you're on, right? Like if you're a man, if you're a woman, hey, today I did this really cool thing that I'm passionate about. What are you passionate about? Or something. I think it's about, you have to reveal stuff about yourself in order to have other people reveal things about themselves. Two, I agree with you about the phone call, and that's a great way to screen. And I think that the pandemic has really helped us use the screening instead of meeting in person as the first, because you can tell in about 3 seconds whether that's someone that you have a connection with, you have energy with, you maybe have something in common, right? Like, and if you're on a phone call, you might be able to ascertain that before you get all dressed up and take the train or drive an hour to go meet them, etc. So I really agree with that. And I love what you said about finding other ways to meet people that are not online, like the meetups and tennis or whatever your interest is, and finding people. I also read something yesterday that said, don't be afraid to ask people at work out, which is a new one that I haven't heard lately.
That's my shtick. So
right. Yeah. So, but I also think that it's important to consider that many people find the apps as a simple way to get access. And my hope, my dream out of a call like this, and all the smart people on the call, is that we notice that is one method, and that we don't just default to that, and that we notice that when we're going about our normal life, we can talk to the people next to us at the bar or with friends, and that we, during post-pandemic, that we start going out more, and we realize that it's not so hard to strike up a conversation, have like a basic line or something that you use that's just easy to strike up conversation. Hey, where are you hoping to travel after the pandemic? I don't know what it is. but that we just encourage all of us to just have conversations with people in our daily life, and that will help reduce the dependency on the apps.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with any of that more. And I do have this sense from having interviewed a lot of 20-somethings for the book that while it's always awkward and uncomfortable to talk to strangers or talk to people you don't know at a party or any other event, I kind of feel like this fear of awkwardness is kind of next level with the Gen Z and millennial crowd, that there is a fear of embarrassment or awkwardness that goes beyond what my generation experienced. And I can't fully explain it, but I do think this is part of why so many young people are defaulting to online dating, because they just can't bear to like actually say hi to somebody at a party.
No, I think it's, Diana, I think that's so great about just, being friendly, making eye contact. It is how you approach your life. It's how you live your life. When you walk down the street to get your morning coffee, it's making eye contact. It's saying hello to the barista. It's being friendly. You're being approachable that way. And people like to be around nice, friendly people, right? And that is inviting, it's comforting. So through even approaching your life through that lens and walking down the street a certain way, instead of, on your phone or, with your earbuds in or whatever, just closed off energetically, you're opening yourself up and you become somebody that people want to be around. And that is one of the many approaches that everybody should take when it comes to dating, through whether it's the apps, online, your social network, you're pinging your friends, walking down the street confidently. Again, going back to Beth's story about being a confident woman, that is how you're going to meet somebody. It is really, I'm a big believer in the energy that you bring and you put out into the world, and you're going to attract those right people, whether it's through links dating, a matchmaker, or maybe a friend setting you up. You never know, but it starts with being, I think, happy within yourself and projecting that out to the world.